Please be seated. I would like to welcome Katie Rayburn, who has been with you before at least once, right? Representing campus ministry at UNC. She is a student there, but has previously been a student at the University of Wyoming and served a stint in the U.S. Army. So she has served before in our country and now serving the church, and I turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Father Scott said, my name is Katie Rayburn. I am a student at UNC, studying history and secondary education, and a member of the Lutheran Episcopal campus ministry. And I want to thank you for having me back here as a student preacher again this year. Transfiguration Sunday is a unique time in the church calendar. This morning's gospel reading from Mark has so much we can learn from. Jesus takes 3 disciples up a mountain for a mind-blowing experience, only to tell them not to mention a word until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Another example of Jesus referring to himself in third person. Mark puts this event right after Jesus predicts his death. In typical Mark fashion, this story doesn't have many details. Fortunately for us, John also wrote about this event. And according to John, when Moses and Elijah appear on the mountain speaking with Jesus, they discuss Jesus' death. In the end, after the dazzling white clothes and the booming voice from the cloud above, telling the disciples to listen to Jesus, Mark tells us what Jesus commanded Peter, James, and John. Do not speak of this until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. As humans, like the disciples, we tend to get mesmerized by the dazzling white clothes, by the multiple healings and the feeding of the masses. We forget that Jesus didn't come to earth in a booming big cloud or walked out of a burning bush. He was made man. He was born of a human into a human's body. Therefore, as much as Jesus was divine, he was human, with human fears and human pain. So let's take a moment to look past the dazzling clothes that appear and disappear and think of the man inside them. A man who recently told the 12 people closest to him that he was going to die. A man who might have been talking to the prophets of the Old Testament about his own death, and then hears his Father's voice booming from a cloud above him. Here is a human who knows his Father has an amazing plan for the world, but for it to come true, he must suffer and die. The mental and emotional burden that must have on a person. And yet he calmly and repeatedly discusses his death without faltering. Living in Colorado, we've all seen the side of mountains. They're not exactly smooth, paved surfaces to have deep conversations on. And so I picture Jesus walking down the mountain with Peter and James and John, telling them not to say anything until the Son of Man had risen from the dead, meaning himself, and not even being distracted or distraught enough by this to miss a step or trip over a rock. This shows a strength and resolve that we all wish we had. But this is the problem with never seeing and never showing internal struggles. If your mentor never shows the internal struggles, then you think your struggles are unique. They are weakness or a lack or loss of faith. I know it's jumping ahead a bit, maybe a spoiler alert. But when Jesus was on the cross, even he cried out to God, "Why have you forsaken me?" It's important to remember that Jesus was human. He was made man and dwelt among us, as the Nicene Creed says. Therefore, he had human feelings, and even knowing God's plan for everything, still had human fears and human pain. It is so easy to overlook these struggles in those we admire, see them as fearless and able to tackle anything. Yet this leads to overestimating their strength and their resolve, not recognizing when they need help or support, and at the same time, underestimating ourselves. I know for me, growing up, I always admired how stoic my father was in any situation. How as a single parent, he got everything done, even when my brother and I failed to do our chores. I can count the number of times I'd seen him cry on one hand. He has always been my hero for everything he did without any sign of faltering. But now I'm an adult, with a home and commitments of my own, and I realize how hard it all is. It took me over a year of struggling on my own, thinking I was weak or lazy, or just somehow not good enough to balance it all. I was so focused on my internal struggles that I had never seen in my father, and I thought I was lacking in some way. Finally, I asked my dad, how do you do it all? By this point, I had finished my first year at UNC. I had acquired a puppy. I had taken on a huge position in a club my dad and I had been part of, and I was an official homeowner for a year and a half. Long time to think that I was not doing it right. Out of all the wise answers I was ready to absorb, I was ready to learn some revolutionary trick. But his response was simple. Set up a livable routine and understand not every task will be accomplished every week. He said it's hard. It's a struggle. And it's harder when you don't have someone to share the burden. He told me I was doing a fine job and that I was juggling more than he had at my age. At this moment, I realized two important lessons. First, I should have helped more as a moody teenager. But truthfully, what I learned was that my dad was not some magical superhero who could do it all. He was a human who, as a single parent, had limited options for sharing burdens and venting to a sympathetic and understanding person. The bottom line, I had built him up too much, as most children do. Much like Peter panicking when Jesus told the disciples that he was the Messiah because he was focused on his friend dying and not on saving the world, or panicking on the mountaintop when seeing Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus, saying they need a shelter or dwelling of some kind. Do you need a tent? I'll build a tent. I focused on the dazzling white clothes, on the lawn that always got mowed, and I failed to see the person who was trying to balance it all alone. The second lesson, I refused to notice the strengths and gifts that I had. I was so focused on my struggles that I thought were weakness, and failed to see that my own hero was watching me with great pride at how well I was handling the struggles he knew I was experiencing. Jesus routinely encouraged and developed the strength of the disciples, knowing the hardship that was to come. And so, while I don't have a fun catchphrase like "stay salty" from last year, I hope that as we start Lent this week, and as we witness so much hardship around the world, we take a moment now and then to acknowledge the struggles others are afraid to voice, and look past our own struggles enough to take notice of the strengths that God has given each one of us. Amen.
Thank you. Before you go, could you just give us a word about the ministry at the campus?
Of course.
Tell us just a little bit of what's happening there.
Sure. So the Lutheran Episcopal Campus Ministry at UNC is a place that welcomes everyone, regardless of where you're at on your spiritual journey. Gives a home-cooked meal for us students every Sunday night, and we have worship time and fellowship with that dinner. And we reach out to different congregations throughout the year, and it just is a place for people who, especially in this day and age when a lot of younger college students than myself are really struggling with what it means to be Christian, what it means to be a follower of Christ in today's world. And we are able to provide a place to ask questions and have speakers come and discuss these topics that we wouldn't know how to research on our own. And then we go and try to share what we've learned with the campus and with the surrounding congregations.
Thank you. I'm sure that everyone appreciates her taking time. I know it's a ministry that you support from this congregation, and thank you, Katie, for being with us and for your service.